Connor with State of Search by DFW-SEM. We are so excited that you're here tonight. We're going to get started with Kevin right off the bat. Kevin?
Welcome to State of Search by DFW-SEM. Thank you everyone for joining. We've been 19 years of search engine marketing, and that's awesome. So I'm President Kevin Adams, Vice President Tim Shane, Treasurer is Mike Stewart, Secretary is Julie Jones, and our speaker tonight, VP of State of Search and Hospitality, Chris O'Connor, VP of Membership and Registration is Casey Marquis, VP of Sponsorship, Shelly Ellis, VP of Communications, Bill Allen, Board at Large, Rachel Black, Jenna Williams, and Jeff Ferguson. Actually, Shelly's recently married. I've got to change that name. If you want to participate in the committee with us, talk to a board member or email membership@dfwsem.org. Chris?
State of Search. It is coming along so nicely. Now, Kevin and I talked a little bit earlier, and we are reducing the tickets, having a summer sale, and virtual tickets will be $172. He's got the wrong price up there, $172, and in-person's going to be $322. As soon as I can get on the website after this meeting, that will all be updated. So order your tickets. That's only going to run for a short period of time, so don't let the summer slip away. We've got some great speakers. I've got 3 keynote speakers ready to go, keeping that a secret so far. But on July 1st, you'll all know what's happening and all the speakers will be chosen. So go order your tickets now, the best price you're going to get. Kevin?
That's what we learned. We've got lots and lots of knowledge coming for State of Search. Let us know what you think. dfwsem.org/virtual-meeting-survey. Love to hear your input. If you've got any questions, put them in the chat. And I'd like to present our speaker tonight, Julie Jones, former past president of State of Search by DFW-SEM. I want to brag on her. Like Monday, was talking to someone, and I had done the setup in Google Tag Manager, and their SEO apparently complimented and said, I want to learn how you did this crazy cool thing in Google Tag Manager. And I got that information from none other than Julie Jones last January when she presented for us. So you were in for a treat. All right, take it away, Julie.
Well, thanks, y'all. I am very happy to be back. Today, we're talking about GA4 and how to master it in under an hour. So I'll cover a couple of different things today. We're going to start off with reports. Then we're going to float on to attribution. I'm going to talk to you about how you should name your events. Tip number 4 is going to be all about embracing engagement. And tip number 5 is don't assume that you've made a mistake. And I think I'm most excited about tip number 5. But before I kick it off, I want to reference a quote from Juliana Jackson back in May. And she said, there is no such thing as a GA4 migration. GA4 is a totally different product than Universal Analytics, which explains why it's so overwhelming for a lot of people. Because with GA3, you had a session-based data model, which meant that everything that you were looking at was grouped under a category of sessions. And you'll see here the hierarchy, any page views, any e-commerce events, any custom events, they all fell under that grouping of a session. Now with GA4, you have a flatter data hierarchy. So you still see sessions, but it's going to be a session start event, which is going to have the same level as the page view event and a custom event. So that flattened data structure means essentially one thing. In GA3, everything that you looked at was restricted by a session unless you specifically sought out multi-session data. Whereas with GA4, whenever you're looking at any of your reports, any of your metrics, remember that nothing is grouped by a session. So that is a perfect kickoff to tip number 1, which is we're going to start with reports. Now, reports are one of the biggest things that we use in Google Analytics, and it's pretty easy to access. You'll go up to the upper left-hand corner, click on that little icon. This will open up and you'll see reports. Now, what I really like about these reports is that it's not too different from what you saw in GA3. And I didn't realize this until recently, but I'll show you a comparison of GA3 versus GA4. GA3 is on the top, and you've actually got a lot of the same menu. This helped me because I wasn't thinking about, oh, this is a new product. I was thinking, okay, we're just learning, a little bit different. So look at the real time, same menu option, both are right at the top. Then audience. Now in GA4, they split this out into 3 separate categories: your retention, so new versus returning users, any demographics, and technology or tech, such as your screen size, your device. Historically in GA3, that was all grouped under audience. Now it's just a little spread out, but your same categories of data are still there. Next is acquisition. This menu name didn't change. And then the last one is behavior. This name changed to engagement, but this is still if you're looking for events. Now instead of behavior, you go to engagement. Okay, so let's look back at GA4. This is our main reporting screen. We've got the overview. Now, one of the many critiques of GA4 was that there wasn't as much out-of-the-box reporting. You could do a lot of custom stuff, but who has time for that? Now, Google tried to kind of meet a middle ground, and what they did was they allowed it to be a lot easier for you to edit these standard reports. So you'll see in the upper right-hand corner, there's a little pencil icon. From there, you can edit your different cards. You'll see that in the right-hand side, and then you click Save. To access those later, all you have to do is go back to your main reporting screen, and you'll see at the bottom, there's a section for Library. That will be where all of your reports are saved, and Google even has categories of reports here, such as business objectives or lifestyle. Going back to your main reporting screen, the next thing we want to look at is, acquisition didn't change, this menu item didn't change, but now we have 2 options: user acquisition and traffic acquisition. Which one do you choose? So this segues beautifully into tip number 2, where we're going to have to rethink attribution. Now with GA3, I mentioned before, everything is grouped by a session. And GA4, nothing is grouped by a session by default, which means that you're going to have to think about attribution a little differently. So let's kind of roll back a little bit. Let's talk about attribution in GA3. So with GA3, they used last non-direct session or last non-direct click attribution for conversions. I'm going to be referencing last non-direct session because it'll really help you transition from that data model that is session-based to that event-based data model. So let's use some examples of GA3 attribution. If somebody comes to your website via paid search, then direct, and then via organic search, and they ultimately convert, with last non-direct session attribution, organic search is going to get the credit. Let's say a different user comes through paid search twice, and then comes to your website via organic search. Once again, they make a conversion, and so organic search is going to get the credit. Now let's say that somebody only had 1 session. They came to your website once, and that was directly, but they converted. Direct is going to get the credit. Here's the one that always trips people up. Remember, this is a last non-direct session attribution. So if somebody came via paid search and then organic search and then directly to your website and converted on the direct visit, organic search would actually get the credit because it was the last non-direct click. Now with GA3, we didn't really have to think about that much. We saw our default channel grouping, we saw our conversions, and Google automatically calculated the last non-direct session that got credit for that conversion. Now with GA4, we're going a little bit different. With GA4, we actually have 2 ways to look at attribution. Now if you go for first user source and medium versus session source and medium, your user counts are going to differ ever so slightly. And that's because the attribution changes. With the first user source and medium, that's going to be your first touch. what first got somebody to your website. These are going to be your awareness campaigns, especially if you've got a longer sales funnel. Whereas with session source and medium, that's going to revert back to that last non-direct session attribution. So different ways of looking at attribution, you have the choice of what you want to choose, but you do get the choice in GA4. Now for tip number 3, it's going to be all about event naming. So I mentioned in the last one, we have our 2 different data models, but I'm not going to go into the data model on this slide. Instead, we're going to talk about the custom events. And, in some cases that'll translate to custom events in GA4. You'll notice that the structure is a little bit different, and you don't actually have a limit to your parameters, whereas with your custom event hits in GA4, you only had a category, an action, and a label. Now, there are still some automatically collected events outside of the custom events that I highlighted on the previous slide. GA4 gave us a lot more custom events, such as outbound links, file downloads, form submissions. And so to help us think about how the naming conventions translate a little bit, I'm going to show you how what was a custom event in GA3 is going to look like in GA4. So let's take the example outbound links. Now, on my website, I had the category as outbound link, the action is click, and the label was the click or the link URL. With GA4, this looks a little different. And remember, this is automatically collected by Google. You just have to make sure that the setting is turned on within the settings. So with GA4, instead of having a category, an action, and a label, you just have an event, and that event is a click. But what Google's going to do is they're going to add on all these different parameters. And this was originally reflected in my category, action, and label, but now we see link URL, link domain, link classes, and whether or not it was outbound in the parameters. Now, the next one I want to go into is form submit. Technically, this is an automatically collected event in Google Analytics. I would very highly recommend that you do not enable it whatsoever. There have been a lot of reports about how it is largely inaccurate. I've experienced it. People who are more experienced than me have experienced it. Please stick with manual event collection for your forms right now. But the way that Google works with their products is they eventually fix most things, right? And so whenever you translate your form submit from a category, an action, and a label in GA3, such as I did with contact, a form submit, and then a successful submission, you want to follow Google's recommended naming conventions. Now, here's where you have the opportunity to be super strategic. I am a big fan of standardized code. And Google Analytics event tracking in GA4, this is an example where that standardized code gets to shine. So Google will by default collect form ID, form name, and form submit text from any of your form submits. Right now, you may not have form IDs or form names put in your code. This would be a great roadmap item for you to have. And that way, whenever Google does end up fixing their form submissions, and you do eventually add more forms on your website, you've already got a scalable process in place. Now, you'll still need custom events, even with all the automatic events that Google Analytics 4 has. Google actually gives you recommendations for those names. This is new. Anybody who's ever done event tracking before knows that unless you were doing e-commerce, it was really the wild, wild west. But if you have a login, if you have a share, Google has recommendations for generating lead. I would highly recommend you lean into these event names because we see Google, they constantly make iteration or make improvements on their products. And so what we don't want to do is we don't want to miss out on functionality because we didn't think ahead 6 months ago about what to name our events. And remember, with GA4, you can have up to 500 custom events and 25 event parameters per event. So you're not limited, but go ahead and use what Google recommends. And at the end of this chat, I'll put the 2 links for list of Google's recommended events and the parameters that Google automatically collects with their automatic events. But let's take a look at one of the custom events that I had on my website, a social share. So I had my category of social, my action of share, my label was share, and then the page URL on the social network. Now, I did a little bit of work in Google Tag Manager to get the social network name. It wasn't hard to actually reference Kevin's point. We do have a video on how to do lookup tables within Google Tag Manager, but that was a little bit cleaner for me, and that's why I chose to do that. If you look at this and you say, well, Julie, I'm a little bit newer to Google Tag Manager, I don't feel comfortable with this, not a problem. Go ahead and still lean into the name that Google recommends, and then you can put in your own parameters. And then as you get more advanced, you can use the custom parameters or the custom variables that match Google's recommended parameters. This is another example of how you can really lean into standardized code and how that can benefit you in the long run. Say you've got a blog and you're trying to get a lot of blog shares, it might be helpful to identify the content type somewhere on each of the page, whether or not you want to get deep down into the categories or whether or not you just want to distinguish your about pages versus your blog pages. Either way, we know that Google wants to collect that by default, so let's lean into that. Let's write our code in a way that automatically feeds into Google better. Tip number 4 is going to be all about embracing engagement. So GA4 really leaned into this idea of engagement. They wanted to be more than just measuring time on site, average session duration, things of that nature. And they were so into this idea that they actually didn't roll out bounce rate whenever they first rolled out Google Analytics 4. I think Google was a little convinced that they would be able to change all the marketers out there to never care about bounce rate ever again. So when they didn't release it, there was massive uprising, and Google said, fine, we'll put bounce rate back, but it's not going to be the same as what you knew it before. Now bounce rate is based on engagement rate. This is a little bit different than it was measured before, and I'll show you how. So engagement in GA4 can be defined as 2 page views, a conversion, or a time threshold of your choosing. And I'll dive into that in the next slide. Bounce rate was a little bit different. Somebody who bounced was somebody who did not have a second interaction with your website. And the second interactions could include page views. So that matches up 1-for-1 with the GA4 definition. But then the next one is Google Analytics events that you manually tracked. If somebody had visited your website and then had an event fire, they were not considered a bounce. Now with GA4, that's not exactly a 1-for-1. With GA4, unless you marked that event as a conversion, your bounce rate is going to be different from GA3 to GA4. Bounce rate was a little bit easier to inflate, and so depending on the amount of custom event tracking you have, that's going to determine how much different your metrics are. I actually have a blog post about that that I can also post in the chat about how your metrics compare from GA3 to GA4. Now I mentioned the session timeout. You can set a session timeout from 10 to 60 seconds. It's very easy. You go into the settings, you adjust your timer for engaged sessions, and you click save. Now, I want to show how engagement works with GA4, but to do so, I wanted to use a test website so we were all kind of singing from the same hymn sheet. Here we have Georgina Smith. Georgina Smith is a fake real estate blog. She has property pages. She has individual, she has a general locations page. And with GA4, we automatically collect, or I should say GA4 automatically collects these page views on Georgina's website. So if somebody visited the home page, then they visited the properties page, and then they looked at the interior details of a house, Google Analytics 4 is automatically collecting that. But if you're a savvy marketer, you want to say, hey, let's collect a little bit more than that. If somebody clicked to call on mobile, or if somebody submitted an interest form, I'm going to manually track that. Wonderful. GA4 has this front and center. But then there are also a lot of behind the scenes events that GA4 collects. Now you won't see these extra events in your interface, but what's really awesome is that with every event that GA4 collects, there's a timestamp. And this was way different than you had in GA3, where GA3 just collected time based on pages viewed. Here's how much of a big deal that is. So one, you've got your user engagement event, and that's set automatically based on your time threshold. If you say it's 60 seconds, if you say it's 10 seconds, in the previous selection, I selected 10 seconds. But then also, this is an incredible feature that I haven't actually seen on any other analytics platform. So if y'all have seen this, please put it in the chat, correct me if I'm wrong. But GA4 measures when you close a tab, when you navigate to another page, or when somebody reloads a page. This is groundbreaking because if you look at somebody's timeline on Georgina Smith's website, they actually spent 3 minutes and 30 seconds not engaged with the website. They spent 3 minutes and 30 seconds on Google looking at other agents. And so it was inflating the amount of time that you thought somebody was engaged with your website. You also have the exact time that somebody exited the website. So whereas GA3 measured page views or measured time, much like you would measure distance to a place based on like stoplights, GA4 measures everything. So with GA4, you could get the total time on site, which would be 8 minutes, 20 seconds. This would be available via BigQuery. But the actual session engagement time, the time that you have that user's attention, was only 5 minutes. And then the last reason why I really want people to lean into the idea of engagement in GA4 is because encompassing that in your vocabulary opens up so many more metrics that you can talk to your clients and your internal stakeholders about. So I looked up engagement related metrics in GA4, and you'll see here that we have 7, including active users, people that were actually on your site for more than 10 seconds. Engage sessions, again, you still have that measure of engagement based on the time threshold that you sent or the conversion or the page view. Whereas bounce rate related metrics, you only have 1, which is bounce rate. And so expand your vocabulary, be able to talk to your clients and your internal stakeholders about how people are engaging with your website. And then tip number 5, I explained that this was my favorite tip, and it sounds like a cop-out, but it really is. Don't assume that you've made a mistake. And here's why. GA4 is not finished yet, okay? There are still bugs. There are still improvements that need to be made. And what was the most frustrating part for me is that we were trying to debug events in GA4 and we couldn't. It seemed like they were just unsolvable. And so rather than go down a rabbit hole of trying to solve a bug that turned out to actually not be your fault, what I started doing was I follow Matteo Zambon on LinkedIn or on Twitter. He actually has a list of GA4 bugs. The second thing is if you're seeing something in your Google Analytics 4 account that doesn't look quite right, see if the Google Analytics demo account shows the same bug you're seeing. And I'll show this in my next slide. And then the last thing is make sure you wait 48 hours before reporting on data. The way that Google Analytics batches their data in GA4 is a little bit different than GA3. And as a result, you can't pull same day data, you can't pull yesterday's data. It's going to be incomplete. And that's not necessarily a knock on the platform. That's just a new mindset that you have to go with. An example of the 48-hour lag time is if you're looking in Google Analytics 4 and you see empty landing pages, that's going to show up. It's just going to take 48 hours. And then to more quickly identify improvements that Google Analytics 4 has made and new features that you can take advantage of, follow the release notes. Google updates these anywhere from 2 to 6 times a month. And it's nice so you can see like what were you looking at in Universal Analytics that you want to replicate in GA4. An example of the GA4 bug that I found, I'd love to hear if anybody else is seeing this issue, but we all know with Universal Analytics, we were able to see new and returning users. In GA4, it's called new and established, but then I started to see this not set, and I didn't understand why that was happening because although we had implemented some custom code, you know, we followed all of Google's rules. What was going on here? And that's when Todd Bullivant, another great person to follow for analytics, he said, well, check in the demo account, see if you're having the same issue. And you'll see here in this screenshot, this is actually the GA4 Google Merchandise Shop. And they have that not set where somebody is not new, they're not established. And so while I haven't received any word back from Google, we submitted the bug in, I believe, January, February. Still haven't heard anything back, but it at least gave myself and my team a break of we're not crazy. It's not our code. It looks to be this way across other accounts as well. Some other known bugs, if you start a session with a GCL ID parameter, so that means you're auto tagging with Google Ads, BigQuery actually will register the medium and campaign parameters as organic. So it'll still see the source as Google, but you won't get any credit for your ads in BigQuery right now, unless you do a method of hybrid tracking, which is adding the UTM codes for source, medium, and campaign, and then adding on the GCL ID parameter. So that's a known bug that's out there. And then also going back to your event naming conventions, if you use spaces in your event names, that's going to limit some GA4 functionality. Currently, one of the limitations is with audiences, but just keep away from those spaces. And if you follow Google's guidelines, then you won't have to worry about the spaces to begin with. And then the last thing that I want to do is I want to give a special shout out. I certainly would not know what I know without some help. And I believe that analytics knowledge is very much meant to be shared. So here are some people that I would recommend following. Analytics Mania, Dana DiTomaso. She was the one where I really understood the difference in the data models. Data Driven U is another great one. Measure School. Juliana Jackson, I mentioned her earlier. Optimize Smart. Simo Ahava is very tag management heavy, but is a great resource if you're looking to learn something new. And then Tag Manager, Italia.it. This website is actually in Italian, but this is run by Matteo Zambon, and he's the one that has the running list of GA4 bugs. And then lastly, two coworkers, one past, one present, Monica Young and Jenna Williams, who helped me discover the platform. So with that, I will, if y'all have any questions, please pop them in the chat.
Oh my gosh, Julie. You never cease to amaze me. The information was like so golden. I'm like blown away sitting here, and I'm just, not like the rest of them out there. I'm sure some of you probably have questions. Jenna says this was so good. I'm sure you can see that, but I'm like, wow. I'm sure Kevin probably has some questions to ask, but
no, it's totally fine. I understand that this is still kind of overwhelming for some people. And still I have my days 2 years in where it's a little overwhelming for me. So Bill's asking, is there a replacement for multi-channel funnels or the assisted conversion report? Okay, so interesting note on attribution. We've heard that Google kind of took away the attribution, the different attributions, and is kind of forcing people to data-driven attribution because nobody was really using the different attribution models. Let me see if I can pull it up on my screen right now. But then I think the other thing that I would like to mention is that, you know, y'all aren't stuck with Google. Google used to be the only name in analytics before, but now there are plenty of other products. Somebody mentioned with GA4, you get what you pay for, which is why GA4 is so unfinished. But there are other analytics products out there. Here, I'll go back to share my screen. Let's see. Okay. So, Bill, you can see here the model comparison. And this is where you can look at your first click, last click. I really like this conversion path. And that's where you can see the early, mid, and late touch points. Okay, looking at the other questions.
Marianne asks, we can see the total session for a certain period. How can we do that on GA4?
Oh, great question. So I would go back to reports, and then I would just do a simple traffic acquisition. And then you can see here the number of sessions.
Nice.
Okay.
All right. And then when segmenting, filtering the reports like custom dimensions seems choose which subsegments. Is there a way to show all of the subsegments of a custom dimension like in GA3?
I'm not sure if you could phrase the question a little differently, that may be helpful.
Yeah, so this is me. Sorry, yeah, I phrased that terribly. You know, so like going into like segmenting, like if you go to the top.
We lost you, Kevin. We're not hearing you. So until he comes back, Bill says, do we think they'll add the ability to add annotations as we had before?
I hope so. I don't have an exact answer for this, but if they are, then you see them in the release notes.
You did, yeah. Heard you for a second. You want to go out and come back in? Jenna had, obviously you've seen, I love the new conversion paths. It really helps with top of the funnel and bottom of the funnel. So expand on that. What does that mean?
Yeah, so with this, you can see, let's see here, let's go back to the advertising reports. And then the conversion paths. And here's where you can see how your different channels are contributing to the different parts of the funnel.
Gotcha.
So is direct as a closer, is organic an awareness medium?
Very cool. Very cool. And then, of course, Marianne said, thanks, Julie. I'm seeing that reports from GA4 is different from GA3 is different from GA4. Number of sessions. Is this a debug or a delay on reporting?
No, so that's actually based on the way that sessions are calculated. And I've got a blog article on this. So I'm just going to stick this in the chat. So this is going to explain it really succinctly. There are a couple of reasons why your sessions will be either greater or lesser.
Mm-hmm.
And so go ahead and read on that because it's going to be specific to your website, but don't expect them to match up.
Okay.
And just sent that over to Chris, and hopefully you can put it in the chat.
Okay. There you go. All right. Check out her blog because she's got a lot of great information on there. And you know, I'm a novice, I'm a newbie, so I don't know as much as they do, but I sure can understand reading what she tells everybody and talks about. So does anybody else have any other questions? I'm just like blown away, Julie. You always give such a great presentation, and really, really happy that you're here. And of course, you know, everybody's loving what you gave. So and what you talked about. And honestly, where would be a good place for them to reach you if they have questions?
LinkedIn is definitely the best place to reach me. I can put that in the chat too.
Yeah, do that. So if somebody comes up with something or needs help with something or whatever, that would be perfect for everyone to know how to reach you, because I think that, you know, between you and Jenna and the two of you are so brilliant with all this. I think it could help a lot of people. All right, here we go. All right, that is her link to her LinkedIn profile. You're kind of frozen and Kevin disappeared. Does anybody else have any other questions or anything? I guess not. Thank you so much, Julie. It was, as usual, fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. And
Thanks for having me.
That was
absolutely,
awesome, Julie.
absolutely. Anytime. You are welcome anytime. So with that being said, I am going to end the show. We want to thank you for being here today. So appreciate each and every one of you for showing up. Really, really great information from Julie. I hope you share it with people if they're struggling, because now's the time. It's June 14th and July 1st is the bell drop and mic drop, whatever you want to call it. So if you haven't gotten to it now, you better get to it really fast. So thank you so much, Julie. We appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you everyone for attending State of Search by DFW SCM. All right, and we'll see you next month.
Bye-bye.